Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is June 18th, 2015. This particular webinar came at the request of some parents. It came because I think we have a lot of information and curriculum for parents, but we don't have as much for siblings. Although we do host sibling webinars on occasion, we try to do that once a month. There's not a lot of educational webinars that are directed directly for them being the audience. So tonight we're going to talk about that, talk about letters that siblings may or may not be asked to write during their brother or sister's part of the process. If you are a sibling and you're on the webinar live tonight, if you've submitted a question, please let me know your age. It helps me to understand how to respond to you and in what kind of language to use. So that's helpful to me. And I'll try to keep this pretty broad because I think this is going to be one of those webinars that a lot of siblings, when their brother or sister first enters the program, are going to have questions about when to write and how to write and so forth. So let's start off with the basics. The idea of wilderness therapy, it is a time for reflection. There is a piece of it that's about distance and about separation. Right? That's not the long-term plan, but that helps to facilitate something. It helps to facilitate a level of reflection. I heard it described as spending time with yourselves and seeing how you like the company, but it's a time to get clear. When we are removed from many distractions, from other people, even people that love us the most and that we love the most, we are encouraged to find our center, our truth, our authenticity, because we're oftentimes so conditioned to respond to other people, to watch other people, to take cues from other people. So this is a time when that is removed, or at least it's reduced. So there is a part of this. It's a time for people to spend time apart. I tell a lot of stories about being away and the benefit, but one of my favorite stories is one that happened in my own life. This is a few years ago when I was describing with my therapist at the end of a session that my young adult son at the time was going to be going away for a couple of years. He was going to go on a service mission. And I wasn't even aware of the sadness that I felt until toward the end of this session. I started to explain it. And I said, Jake's going to go away. I'm going to miss him. And I said it exactly. I said, I can't find the words to use to express to him how much I love him. And the tears were rolling down my cheeks. And my therapist patiently waited. And she said, he knows how much you love him. And then she paused again. And then she said, and he needs to get as far away from you as he can. And immediately I laughed and I was comforted because I realized that that's part of this process. Part of him, part of his rite of passage was getting away from dad and mom. And nobody loves the children in our programs as much as their parents and as much as their siblings and close family members. That's a truth. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the most clear about it, right? Sometimes our love has the effect to obscure our vision and to cloud our vision. And sometimes the anger, the sadness, the hurt, all of that mixes in with what's going on inside of us so that we lose some clarity. So we acknowledge and recognize that families love their children and their brothers and their sisters the most. But if love was the cure, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. Love can be the motivation, it can be the fuel toward the cure, but the cure is some of the hard and intense therapy and work that we do here. So that distance creates what psychologists would call differentiation. Differentiation is the balance between separateness and connectedness, right? In fact, by definition, connectedness can only happen when there's separateness. Because if people aren't separated, if they're over-identified with each other, over-involved, so to speak, with each other, then really what is happening is there's a lack of clarity because there's less than two people present. So pulling away sometimes is an ingredient to getting closer in the long run. So the distance of wilderness therapy, the remoteness of it, becomes part of the process that helps to create a new kind of clarity, a new kind of awareness, a new recognition of one's self and one's truth and one's authenticity. So that's part of what we're creating. And when we start off our program, there's no contact by phone with all of our students, and there's contact through letters. And letter writing is a wonderful kind of therapy because there's a deliberateness to it, right? There's an intention to it. You have to be really thoughtful, and it slows down the communication. So you can read back through it and understand exactly what you intend to say and say it more clearly and say it with some new skills and some new tools. So we start off with letter writing and we focus on the parents. And as treatment progresses, we oftentimes will introduce more family into the process, letter writing. So then it might be siblings and other close relatives, and sometimes it even extends beyond that to be close friends of the family, right? Important influencers in the child's life. So that's a part of it too. But we start that out slowly. We don't want to diffuse the energy and the focus in the beginning. So oftentimes siblings are asked to wait to write later. But in some cases, therapists at Evoke will invite siblings to write very early. And sometimes that can be very effective when you are asked to write an impact letter. An impact letter is a letter that you write to the participant at Evoke, and you share with them your thoughts about what was going on in their life before and how you want this program to help, or what you want it to help with. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But that's an impact letter. You can look at the instructions that the parents have, and you don't have to write that one that detailed, but you often can. And there's a special perspective that siblings have, right? They're not parents, they're not authority figures, and so they can provide a more like peer-like feedback, which often the client or the student is more open to hearing, and there's not that power struggle. So we find those to be incredibly effective at times. In fact, many times these early letters can be something that touches the client or student in ways that parent impact letters don't. So that can be a part of the process. And those can come early at the same time as the parents, or they can come later in the process. And every therapist and every case will do it differently based on what they think is the best thing. Later on in the process, you can also write social or check-in letters. We don't want that distraction early on because we want to increase the focus. But sometimes it's okay to have those kind of letters to say, life is going on. We miss you. We want you to be a part of what's going on for us. We love you, and we want to stay connected to you. So that can be a part of it. Anytime that you're a sibling and you want to become involved by watching the webinars, that can be a very helpful preparation to engage in the program more significantly, like writing letters. And like I said, siblings have a different perspective, sometimes even a more objective perspective than the parents. That can be the case at times. So let's talk about what your letter looks like. And this is mostly in the spirit of the impact letter. There's a book called Love First, actually, by J and J. And it's a book about intervention. And it's a great title because we got to start off with love. We got to start off with love. We got to end with love. And we got to put love in the middle, because we don't want this to be about judgment. We don't want it to be about shame. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. We want it to be coming from a place of love and concern for the client or the student at Evoke Therapy. And with that love, this goes for parents too, we want you to try as hard as you can to express primary feelings, primary emotions, we call them. Anger, frustration, those more volatile emotions, those are what we call secondary feelings, because they serve to mask, to cover up, to prevent us from feeling vulnerable. Right? We get angry when we get hurt. We get angry when we get embarrassed. We get frustrated when we feel powerless or sad. So all of those secondary emotions provide actually a barrier in many ways. Sometimes it's okay to talk about those because that's the doorway that we can walk through to find other emotions, other more vulnerable emotions. But we ask and encourage all family members when they're writing anything like an impact letter to be as raw and vulnerable as possible. It's oftentimes easier to hear from other people. So talking about your worry, your sadness, being scared, concerned, hurt, etc., those can be more helpful, more inviting than some of the more agitated, right? Some of the more provocative, angry, frustrated, enraged, those kinds of things. I talked about the value of a sibling voice. Oftentimes it can be something that they can hear a little bit easier than the voice of their parents. And they'll say, in many cases, in response, they'll say, it touched me more. I'm more open to it. Because we want them to not make this about the parent, right? Even in the case of when the parent writes, we say, this isn't about your parent. This isn't about the fact that your parent is angry or upset or hurt. That's something to listen to. That's something that provides you some information. But this is about your life, right? This is about you struggling. So what we want them to do oftentimes is accomplished by a sibling letter where it's not accomplished by a parent letter, or not as easily. Sometimes, and this is important, and I'm going to say this before I talk about this last bullet point, you can share this with your parents if they're putting pressure on you. Um, Sometimes the parents need, really want the siblings to write a letter, and sometimes the siblings aren't ready to do this. Sometimes the siblings are feeling resentful of all the time and attention. Sometimes the siblings are feeling so hurt. So it's critical. This is to parents and to siblings that parents learn to let siblings have their own process, to have their own feelings, and to give them time. You might want them as a parent to write a letter, right? You might think that that's helpful, but they might need their own space for a time. And we encourage parents to go slow, to give them their space. And I can't tell you how many times parents write to me or ask me on the webinars how to deal with a sibling that's at home, or maybe even a sibling that's not at home. And my response often is, you don't have to do anything but listen. You don't have to fix it. It's not broken. They're upset and they're entitled to their feelings. So it's important that parents learn to respect their process, and that children can learn to ask for that. So let's talk about some overarching principles that relate to letter writing and sibling participation and help during the treatment process. Part of what we want everybody in the family to find access to be more clear about, is to come from a place of honesty, to take out the manipulation, the coercion, the shame, the guilt, right? So part of the process in writing, part of the process in the separation piece, is for everybody to become more clear and more honest. And it's important for siblings to understand this, and I say this to parents all the time. You can't control how they're going to respond to your letter. They might respond with frustration, or just dismiss it. They might put you in the category of mom and dad. They might respond, of course, in more positive ways. But you can't control that. And so what that really does is that invites you as an individual, as a sibling, to just focus on your honesty and not focus on how they're going to react. If you can come from a place of love, and you can come from a place of genuineness and honesty, you've succeeded. You can't measure your success by how your brother or your sister responds. And like I said, it evoked, and we're passionate about this idea of the role of shame in our lives. That we don't believe that long-term change, long-term healthy change, occurs when motivated by shame. We believe shame is a barrier to long-term change. We believe that shame can at times temporarily help somebody to steer away from a specific symptom or problem, but it's going to crop up somewhere else. It's going to leak somewhere else. It's going to come out in some other way. We think that the way that it works in the long term is from love from others and from love of self. So it's not about making them feel guilty or horrible for all the things they've done. That's a part of the discussion that you can share, that can inform them, can cause them to ask themselves questions. But really, again, we want to focus on love and them loving themselves and understanding themselves. And even understanding that in all human beings, all symptoms, all issues originate from some wound. That's not to take away responsibility or accountability, but it is to add compassion and empathy for the person who struggles and suffers. And we believe that about everybody participating in this process, that every symptom has its origin in a wound. And now, why would we be mad at somebody for a wound? And it is true that the things that we do to protect ourselves often hurt other people, but we have to learn to look deeper than that. There can be at times for the sibling embarrassment about this process, not wanting to deal with it, even being confused about what to say to others. You have a right to protect yourself. You have a right to be vague. You have a right to talk about your brother or sister going away to school, because that's true. And you have a right to not tell anybody anything. And you also have a right to tell your story. You have a right to discuss what's going on for you. And of course, the client or the participant in the program, they have their own story to tell too, and part of this is their story. But you can learn, you can learn to tell your story. We've had some struggles. And the way that you do that is you keep that vague. But again, you can't control how people are going to respond. They might judge you. They might judge your family. They might get angry. They oftentimes will actually share that they've gone through similar experiences. That happens more often than not, but you can't control that and you can't manage that. So I encourage and try to empower all people in the family to say what they want and to not say what they want and understand that once they say it, it's not their information anymore, it's out there. And anybody can do with it what they want. If you can let go of that, then you're in a good space. And it's also okay to have conflicting feelings. You might feel relieved that your brother and your sister is away. You might feel resentful and angry at your parents at the way that they did it. You might feel sad and worried about your brother or sister. You might feel guilty because you feel relieved. All you can have more than one feeling and feelings that even conflict with each other. That's a normal thing to feel. And the ideal in families, and if you were my client, would be for me to understand what you're feeling and to help you just make sense of it. Right? Those are normal reactions to have. It's not uncommon. And like I said, that you get to feel what you get to feel. There's really no difference in the training and the teaching and the skill set that parents have to use with siblings as they do with the child that is struggling and has been sent to a vote. It's the same skill set. The application is the same. So learning to empower, allow, permit, learning to know that pain and sadness and hurt aren't broken, learning that resentment makes sense, learning that anger and feeling like you want to protect yourself as a sibling makes sense. And then there's this idea, and this might apply more to older siblings, but ideally it's your parents' decision and they get to make it and you get to have your feelings about it. But if that lack of understanding or lack of agreement starts to lead to you sabotaging the process, especially if you're an adult, it's inappropriate. And what I tell parents is they have a right to say to you, we're not going to talk about this. I've heard your opinion. Thank you for telling me. I know you're concerned about your brothers or your sister, but it's our right to make this decision, and this discussion is over, and it's not going to occur again. And that's their right. Okay, that's what they have a right to do, and it is their responsibility. And like I said, that applies mostly to young adult children, but it can apply to teenagers because teenagers can become fixated on wanting to punish their parents for the decisions that they've made. And it's just your parents' job to hold the boundary. It's just their job to hear it, hold the boundary, move on, and not allow the discussion to happen if it's going to turn into nagging, pressuring, manipulation, and so forth and so on. So that's the last thought that I had about that. I'm happy to take any questions. I'll take two sets of questions. Any questions that relate to the topic of siblings or writing your sibling, I'm happy to take those now. Then I'll go through some announcements, and then I'm happy to talk about any questions on any topic at the end of the webinar. So Steve, are there any topic-related questions that I can address this evening? Nothing yet? Okay. I'll go to some announcements, and then if any come in, I'll take them at the end. So here's the announcements. You've seen our workshops and intensive coming up. You can go to our website. We have family intensives, which some of you, if you're a sibling, might be invited to with your parents. We have individual intensives coming up in the fall also, and that's going to be really exciting for us. So you don't have to have a child in any of these. You don't have to have a child at Evoke, and you can come just to have your own 4 or 6 day experience. We also have young adult pursuits trips. For these are high adventure trips, not necessarily therapeutic, although we believe that they're healing and we believe they have a therapeutic benefit, but they're not for people who are necessarily struggling with issues, but just want an outdoor, sober, fun adventure with some staff that are not only world-class guides, but also incredibly gifted clinicians at times if issues come up for people. So we'll solidify some of these. I just got back from a tour of the East Coast, so we'll solidify some of the parent groups coming up. There's some basic information here. I will be at the one in the Bay Area next month on July 9th, and then I'll also be at the one in LA on the 15th, and then we're going to do some in the Northwest, and I have been passionately requested to come to Chicago, so I'm going to do that, and then we're going to revisit DC. We want all family members, ideally, and all parents specifically, to go to 6 of these meetings while your child is here. So if your child's here, start now. If you're a sibling, you're welcome to go to some of these also to learn about addiction. It's not just for family members of addicts. It's for family members of somebody that they love that's engaged in self-destructive behaviors. So you can just translate the addiction or the alcohol to depression, to cutting, to any other sort of acting out or acting in that can become harmful, and learning how to deal with them. Follow us on social media for announcements, for inspirational quotes and inspirational stories. You can follow us on Facebook for the same kind of information. And then, of course, we have our blog, which is updated often a couple of times a week with new articles. Here's my book, and if you buy it from the Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon, 10% of the proceeds go to helping people who can't afford treatment. So you can buy the book at Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or ideally at our foundation book page, which has a ton of resources of other kinds of books. I'm going to change this actually, Steve, so I'm going to go buy that, but the next one is going to be about field visits. So I'm going to go to questions. Should we tell our son at Evoke that a sibling may write a letter, or better for it to be a surprise? Generally speaking, to be a surprise, I think. And this is a great question because, and you're not asking it for this reason in this way, but as much as you can, pull away from getting in the middle. And it's safe now, right? It's safe now. So pull away from getting in the middle of the sibling relationship. You know, you can encourage it, you can support it, you can ask questions and make invitations, but do as much as you can to pull away from that. But yeah, I think absolutely, in almost all cases, have it be a surprise. Besides, you don't know if it's coming or not. You don't know if they're going to do it on time. And then you're in a position of trying to manipulate them to do it because you promised the child out in the field that it was coming. So circumstances could also change, and then you put yourself in a vulnerable situation. But let it be a surprise for the most part, and yeah, do your best to pull out of facilitating and being an intermediate between one sibling or another, best you can, especially in a situation like this where everybody's safe. I'm wondering if the letters are screened to make sure that we don't say anything that might negatively affect our siblings. I am 23, brother. Great question. Um, we there's a law about this, so we comply with the law. The law says that we can't screen letters unless a parent asks us to. So ideally, we ask parents to make sure. Generally speaking, we ask all letters to go through the parent. Then the parent ideally screens them, and then if the parent wants us to screen them or has specific questions, then we will be happy to look over those. So great question, and yeah, that's how it works. And if you're asked to send the letter straight to the therapist, you can say the same thing. But by law, we can't screen them unless the person writing it or the parent is requesting that of us. And um, in the case of a sibling, you wouldn't have access or an ability to write unless you knew where to send it anyway. So you're going to go through or with the parent, and that's how it's going to work. And we're happy to provide that kind of feedback. Is there anything off limits or shouldn't be said as long as it is honest? That's a great question. Sometimes in the process, I'll ask them not to talk about home because it's a distraction. Sometimes I'll ask them to talk about home because I don't want to rub their nose in it, but it's okay for them to understand we miss you. It's the holidays, or we're doing a trip and we miss you. So sometimes that's a part of it. I think the kind of things that would be off limits would be the negative or undermining or sabotaging things. If you were to say things like feelings are stupid, if you were to endorse any of the behaviors, passively by talking about engaging in them with him or her, that would be a problem. Um, but I think if it's honest and it's from love and it doesn't sabotage the program, I know that leaves it open, right? But as long as you're supporting the therapy, we support mom and dad. We want you to get help. And even if you believe mom and dad overreacted or acted too early, you can say, you know what? I know they love you. And there were some things that you needed help. And maybe you or I could argue that this wasn't necessary, this level of care wasn't necessary, but now it's time to work on it. So, honest is great, love is needed. Um, don't sabotage. Be mindful and intentional about whether or not you talk about stuff going on at home. Don't war story, as we like to call it, where you're swapping old war stories with your brother or your sister. So those are the things, but I think that about covers it. Sometimes there'll be a specific request that a therapist might have you ask about or talk about. Just waiting to see if there's another one. Steve, my moderator, might be loading it up right now. I do want to thank, there's several siblings on, so thank you for attending and for your support. Tell your brother or your sister you watched the webinar. Watch the webinar that's for family and friends. I think that's a great webinar for siblings to watch, is the webinar that I created for family and friends, so you understand what the process at Evoke is like. Our children are not writing to one another, they say, because their letters have to go through parents. Comment? Okay. I think they want a level of privacy right now that's not appropriate. So my answer would be okay. And that, I think there's a place for that. Obviously, for siblings to have a relationship that is unsupervised, right? That is private. There is, but not during this very short intervention. Sometimes I'll have letters early on in the program by extended family members or siblings. I'll have them all be screened by the parents, and then later on I won't. That's in the case of a student or client doing really, really, really well in the program. So it's a graduating level of freedom, a graduating level or reduction in supervision. So my response would be okay. Just be patient. Say, I'm sorry that's the way it is, and don't try to manipulate or coerce. Just let it be that way, and let them decide if they still want to or not. If there's a piece of information that they are struggling to share that's critical to the treatment process, you can ask about that. But for the most part, I would just um, be patient with them and waiting for the opportunity when a private discussion could happen or not. Because right now, in this part of the process, it's not appropriate. It's not time. There's a lot of wonderful things that happen in the world that aren't a part of wilderness therapy, right? We don't have them reading books for pleasure, and that's a healthy thing. We don't have them doing a robust academic curriculum. We don't have them conversing and talking to other loved ones, even that are positive influences in their life, because we're just trying to increase the focus, trying to turn up the volume on the child, on the child's issues, on the child's struggles, on the child's whatever's going on for them, so that we can heal it. So it's like the analogy that I use is the emergency room, right? If you get in a car accident, imagine a 20-year-old young man getting in a car accident, and he pulls, the ambulance brings him to the trauma center, the emergency room. And if the parents show up, what's the thing that they'll do with the parents during that initial phase? They'll ask the parents to leave. Now, in that case, nobody loves the child more than the parents. But in the case of the early phases of treating with emergent care, it becomes a distraction. And then once the child is stabilized, the parents will come in. And then sometimes as the child then moves to a different part of the hospital where they're more stable, then more people will come in. And then of course they can have more visits than they go home. That's the same model. It's the same analogy as the kind of treatment we're doing. We're doing interruption in a crisis. We're doing stabilization. And then we're doing treatment. And then we're opening the box up, if you will, to more and more freedoms and opportunities as they demonstrate an increased health and responsibility for themselves. So just be patient and let them be upset that it's that way. And don't respond to what at times can be the manipulation that you're supposed to give in because you want the communication to happen so badly. All right. Thank you. Thanks for attending. I hope this webinar, for those of you that are watching it recorded, is also helpful, and that as you prepare to write your sibling, you can draw on some of these principles. Thanks, Steve, for moderating. Remember, siblings and family members for this matter, if you want to learn more about the program, watch any of these webinars, and I would start with the webinar for family and friends, explaining and introducing Evoke to family and friends. I think that's a great place to start. And I think it's wonderful. Siblings always ask me, what can I do? If you can become interested in just a little bit, and the type of treatment and the type of problems and the way that we think about it and what your parents are learning, that to me would be the biggest support that you could give to your brother or sister out there in this process, is to become interested in the issues that they're dealing with, both the struggles, the problems, and also the solution, the healing that's going on for them. So thanks a lot for joining us. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.